Hello and welcome to PolyToots. Welcome back, hopefully, because this is part 2 of a multi-part beginner series where we create this model of a Jeep. In this first modeling video, we'll be completing the basic shape of the Jeep, the wheels, windshield, and some basic interior. So while there are many ways to go about starting any model, my personal choice here would be a plane, just to shape the sides. And since we already have the cube in the scene, we might as well make use of it. Let's go into edit mode with tab, press 3 for face mode, select either one of the sides, and then we can invert the selection with Control and I. Then we can just press X to delete, and the option we want is to delete faces. We'll get to some of these other options later. While we're still in face selection mode, let's reselect this plane, come to a top view and move it so it lines up with something in our reference, like the outer edge. It's worth noting that while moving an object like this in edit mode as opposed to object mode, we're keeping the origin where it was before, as technically we're not moving the object, we're moving the geometry that makes up the object. It's not something to worry about too much for now though. Since most of this Jeep is symmetrical, we should add a mirror modifier to save us half the work, and we do that by coming over to the modifiers panel over here in this big scary properties menu. Just click add modifier, and then either try to find it among all the other modifiers, or search for mirror. For me, the axis I need is the Y, which you can tell by the axis lines on the grid, or by checking the orientation gizmo up here. So I'll switch this from X to Y. Now let's switch into a side view, either with the Alt and middle mouse button flick we learned in the last video, or by clicking the correct axis up here. You can also press the tilde key, and you'll get the wheel menu for viewing angles. Man, so many options. Let's get into X-ray mode with Alt-Z. Press 1 to go into vertex mode, and I'll just move the verts around until they roughly line up with the body. We can see from the top view that the angles of the Jeep change a lot here, so let's add in some geometry to help us out with this. Get back into edit mode, and we'll use Control and R to enter loop cut, and this time we'll scroll the middle mouse wheel up so that we get an extra segment. 2 for now is fine. Click to select, and I'll also right click now to keep them where they are. Then back to the top view. You'll want to stay in X-ray mode for this, otherwise it will only grab the vert it can see and not the one under it. This is one of Blender's biggest pain points in my opinion, but you get used to it. So that's Alt-Z to enter X-ray, box select the verts and just move them somewhere that makes more sense. So in the end you should end up with something like this, where the plane just slopes inward a bit. The things to focus on are the larger, more obvious shapes first. For example, I'm drawn to this cutout shape of the doorway, or at least where a door could go. So again, we're going to rely on the loop cut tool and create some helpful cuts. We'll need one right down the middle, one to the left where it starts, and then one over here on the right, which I'll position roughly in the middle of this curve. Now we can enter face mode, select these 2 faces and delete them. From here, we can pull this edge across, which will help us a bit with the shape of this doorway. And as low poly as this model is, I do draw the line at leaving this area as a sharp corner. So we can smoothen this out with a bevel, which will be Control-Shift-B. And just like with adding loop cuts, we can use the mouse wheel to increase segments. Do as many as you please, of course, but remember that more geometry is just more work. I'll be keeping it simple. We could do the same thing over on this other little curve here, but that's going to give us some pretty horrendous topology that will require cleanup. Instead, let's not overcomplicate any of this and just add in a new cut here where the curve ends and here where it starts. And we can then select these 2 edges and press F, which adds in a new face. I need to take a second here to remind you all that triangles are completely fine. Like, don't be afraid of them. This polygon over here though, which has like 6 vertices that make it up, is a bit nasty. Technically speaking, we're okay because this is a flat surface and it won't deform with animation, but we should still tidy it up a bit. First off, make sure you've set your snapping options to vertex. The hotkey for snaps is Shift and Tab. But I've never actually used it, because one nice thing Blender does is actually enable snapping in the background if you're moving something and holding the control key down. So let's add in a new edge loop here, click once, and as we're sliding down here, just hold Control and hover over this vertex, or this one, or this one. And you'll notice that our new edge is aligning itself to those verts. So let's add in 2 new loop cuts to match up with the other 2 verts. And then we can select these 2, press J to join, same for the other 2, and same for these 2 as well. By doing this J to join, we're not actually adding in new edges. They were already there, we're just tidying it up a bit and dictating the flow of the topology. Let's move on to the back wheel arch for now. We're going to treat this in the same way we dealt with the doorway, so we'll need to add in a few loops that can help us punch out a hole. I'll start by adding one over where the arch ends, here, and since we already have one close enough on the left, we'll just stick this one right in the middle. We still don't have much to work with here though. We need some more geometry if we want to get anything that resembles a bend. We also have the arch completely end over here, so let's add in a horizontal loop cut for that. From here, we can move these new vertices to the curvature of the arch, leaving us with an obvious set of polygons to remove. And look, we're not going to win any awards for amazing topology, but luckily that isn't a real thing anyway. Now we'll tackle the front area a bit, and this is where it's worth mentioning that just going off of blueprints can be really difficult. Like, we have these other views, but it's hard to tell what's really going on in these areas behind the wheel, and that's where more reference will come in handy. I've got this pure ref sheet on another screen to help. I can't share it with you, but just Google up some pictures of the Willys Jeep and you'll be good. So from that I can tell that this area needs to change shape a bit and get extruded inwards, which is going to require a bit of rejiggling and also highlights why it's important to keep things basic early on. I need an extra loop in here, so I can pull these verts to follow the angle of this section coming down, but we already have this other edge loop in the way which needs to move in order for us to do that. Which is fine, of course, but one really important thing to remember is this whole section is at a slight angle in the top view, even though it looks flat from the side. So if we were to just grab this edge and move it on the X like this, we're going to change the angle as well. We can somewhat get around this by pressing G twice. And what this will do is constrain the movement to specific edge loops, allowing us to slide geometry across existing edges. So let's do that here, G twice, and just slide it out of the way a bit. Then G twice here to line it up with this angle, and same for the other 2. Now we can select the faces of the shape we've made, and press E to extrude them. When we extrude like this, we are left with some extra geometry, which in this instance we don't need, so Shift select those and X to delete the faces. We can tell from the front view here that it doesn't come down at a straight angle like we have, so we can come here and grab this edge to move it down. I think it will be a bit too close to this edge under it though, so I'll move them both actually. Let's also check the front view real quick. You'll drive yourself insane if you keep trying to match each view perfectly, because I'm not sure there's a reference on the planet that actually lines up on all views. Use them more as guides. We've ended up a little wonky on the side view here now, and that's okay. It's all just basic geometry, so just keep moving things around until it makes a bit more sense. Anyway, let's make this a bit more 3D now. We're going to select all the outer edges, which we can do easily by just selecting everything, and then coming over to the select menu, look for select loops, and the one we want is select boundary loop. This will select all open edges. This is a great one to get into your quick favorites too, which you can do by right-clicking on the menu item. I've already added it in, so the option for me is to remove it. Remember that we can call the quick favorites menu with the Q key. So with the boundary selected, I'm going to press E to extrude and Y to lock it to the Y-axis. And I'm not going to go the entire way because I need a loop at the back to complete the arch area. Then I'll press E and Y again to keep extruding. And you'll notice that we can just keep going and sort of overlap the other side, creating geometry that crosses over each other. Not great. So I'll click to just keep this extrusion there, and then come over here to the mirror modifier and enable clipping. And now if I drag this across, you'll see it's all meeting each other in the middle, all tidy like. Now let's round off the front corner here. So select these edges and we'll do a bevel, which is Control B. Remember that Control Shift B was to bevel or chamfer vertices, but Control B without the shift is to bevel edges. You'll notice it's a little weird, like it's pulling down much further than it's going across the top. Not very even at all. This is because the scale of our object isn't uniform, which we can see by tabbing out into object mode and looking at the item panel. Our Y scale is way off, so as far as Blender's concerned, we're not even, and thus the bevel is also coming out not even. We can fix this by pressing Ctrl and A with the object selected, and choose the scale option to apply the existing transformations. Now you can see we're at 1, 1, 1, and if we tab into edit mode, Ctrl B to bevel, you'll see it's much nicer than before. If you wanted to get rid of this faceted shading, you can do so by going back to object mode, right click with your object selected and choose the shade auto smooth option. This adds a shading modifier to the model, which is angle based. Default is 30, which is generally nice, but this model is so low poly that we've still got a sharp crease on this corner we rounded, so I'll just bump that up until it sorts itself out. We'll go back to that rear wheel arch now, and if we look at the reference, we can see there is a solid piece of geometry here. The hole for the arch doesn't go all the way through to the other side. We could have handled this in the same way we handled that inward slope at the front, but we didn't, and that's life. So let's select these faces and X to delete them. Then I'll select these two opposite edges here and using the F key again to add a face between them. Then simply select the top of this edge and keep hitting F until you've reached the top. Don't forget about the one at the bottom here. Same deal, select it, press F, job done. It's time to start getting some other elements up to the same standard, and we'll start with this Mudguard area here. Rather than making a whole new object from scratch, we can actually just pull a new piece out of the main body, which we'll do by selecting this edge here, press E to extrude, and then Y for the axis lock. Then we'll press 3 to go into face mode, select our new face and press the P key and choose separate the selection. Now we have a whole new object which already comes with the mirror modifier because the main body had it. Let's get into the habit of naming these things as well, so back into object mode with tab, select this main part and I'll hit F2 to rename. I'll do the same for the Mudguard as well. Let's come into the top view, tap yourself back into edit mode, Alt Z for X-ray, and just line up the verts with what you see in the reference. We obviously need a bit more geometry than this for these curves, so it's Control and R again to add in a loop cut, move those new verts out a bit, and then I'll go into edge mode by pressing 2, select it and hit Control B to bevel. And again, just move these new verts somewhere that makes more sense. This is way too high up at the moment, so select everything with A, come into a side view and just drag it down. Now let's pay attention to the slope itself. We don't have enough geometry to achieve this at the moment, so again, let's add in a loop cut, scroll the mouse wheel once for an extra segment, and then let's straighten these out on the X-axis, which we can do easily enough by selecting these verts, S to scale, X for the axis, and then the number 0 to just zero them out. Do the same for the other new verts too. We can go back to a side view now and move them into position. Also a friendly reminder to stay in X-ray mode when doing box selections on verts like this. I'll also add a cheeky bevel onto these two edge loops, which we can do easily with Alt, Shift, and then clicking an edge. Same for this one down here, Alt, Shift, click, then Control B to bevel. I know what you're thinking, oh, now we're going to select the border and extrude it like we did on the main body. Well, you'd be wrong. Although you could do that. Actually, I can't stop you. What I'm going to do though is come over here to the modifiers panel and then either in the generate menu look for solidify or just search for it. Give it a value that looks good to the eye. All this is doing is adding thickness to flat geometry, so we can still only modify our original geometry, but the thickness of it is handled with this modifier. It's pretty cool. Lastly, let's just tuck some of this geometry away by moving this vert. I'm not worried at all about geometry clipping. In fact, a good rule of thumb when modeling is if it's a separate object in real life, it should be separate in 3D as well. Now that I see it in all its glory, I do think it's positioned a little weird, so I'll move it about a bit until I'm happy. We'll come back to this later when we're doing UVs to make some necessary changes, but for now, this will do and we can move on. Before we move on though, there's something I should probably explain, some oddity that you may have run into already, and that's the difference between adding objects in object mode or edit mode. For example, right now in object mode, I hit Shift A and add in a cylinder. You can see in the outliner here that it comes in as a whole new object. Totally expected, nothing crazy at all. But if I was already in edit mode working on something and then press Shift A to add a cylinder, you can see that there's no cylinder added to the hierarchy. And that's because what we've just done is make this cylinder a part of the object that we were already editing. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm just going to undo all of that and then we can move on to the wheels. Making sure I'm in object mode, I'll add in a cylinder. We'll keep this one, I promise. The segments are completely up to you, but I feel like 18 or so would work well here. Then we'll press R, X, and 90 to rotate this. Come into a side view and enable X-ray again with Alt Z. Then just move and scale it so it matches up. We'll do the same for the front view as well, just move it across and scale it on the Y-axis only this time. Because we squished the scale while in object mode, we're once again left with a non-uniform scale. And again, to show you how that's an issue, we'll try to bevel these edges and you can see it's just odd, like really weird. So we'll hit Ctrl and A to open the apply menu, choose scale, and now doing the same bevel, we get a nice even distribution. And as a reminder, we can hold Alt and Shift and click on an edge loop to select the connected loop. So we'll do that here, and then Ctrl B to bevel, and I'll scroll the mouse wheel once for an extra segment. I'm going to tab back into object mode real quick so I can right click this wheel and select Shade Auto Smooth, but you'll notice we are getting this sharp edge along here, and as I explained earlier, we could just increase the angle until it goes away, but instead what I'm going to do is remove this modifier and instead right click and choose Shade Smooth. What this is doing is just applying the same level of smoothing to the entire object. I realize that visually there's no change, but that's because I'm an idiot and I had already increased the auto smooth a little too high. There is a point I'm getting to, I promise, but for now I'm going to box select this face in X-ray mode, and I'm doing box select because I also want to grab the opposite face, as you can see here. Then I'll press I to inset and just drag the mouse until about here. Then I just want to select this one side only, so not the opposite one as well. And I'll press E to extrude it in a bit, then S for a little scale, then back to a side view, press I again to inset, then extrude and scale the opposite way than what we just did. Now you can see it looks really, really weird. And that's because we're using the regular smooth option. So there are no hard edges based on angles or anything like that. But we can add our own, which is a handy thing to know. So I'm going to Alt, Shift, and click on this loop, and this loop. Then just right click and choose Mark Sharp. Just see the results for yourself. If that's not a super performant AAA wheel, then I don't know what is. As for the rest of the wheels, obviously we're going to reuse this one, but it would be foolish to just grab it and Shift D to duplicate, move it, and then duplicate these two and rotate them around to the other side. You're just asking for trouble later. Instead, we'll use Alt and D, which is different from Shift and D because it doesn't make a copy of the mesh, it makes an instance. So as you can see here, if I place this instance back here and then try to make some edits on just one wheel, it will be replicated. This is going to come up again when we do the UVs as well, because I'm not planning on unwrapping the same thing 5 times. We're going to add one on the back as well later, by the way. That's why I said 5. I'm not stupid. I can count. Anyway, let's grab these two. Alt-D again. I'll right-click to keep them where they were, then move them on the Y to the other side. And then just hit R, Z, and 180 to rotate them around. You could just move these until they looked right, but if you're like me and bothered by the fact that we could be perfectly symmetrical, then worry not. If we select one of the wheels here and come up to the item menu, you can see it's about -58 on the X. So we can just copy this value without the minus, and then come over to the wheels on the other side where it shows us 62, meaning I was actually off by a fair bit, and then just paste the value in here. There are other ways to go about this. We could have mirrored both instances and used the main body as the mirror point, but we already learned about mirroring, and I'm just trying to force as much information on you as possible, so you'll get all angry in the comments about how it's hard to follow along, and then I say something like, oh, it's a video, you can just rewatch it, and then put my sunglasses on or something. I don't know. Moving on, let's tackle the windshield next. This might look like a really simple shape, maybe just add a box, scale it down, pop out the areas where the glass is, rotate it and call it a day. But if we look at our reference, there's this really annoying part here, something like a bent pipe, and it seamlessly goes around the border of the whole thing. So this would be the best thing to start on, in my opinion. And while Blender does have its own curves that we could add in, a little hot tip for you is that it's usually much easier to just make your own from a mesh. So what I'm going to do is select the main body, tab into edit mode, and similar to how we handled extruding the Mudguard out from the mesh, I'm going to duplicate this one single vert. So with Shift D, and then just pull it out away from the body. Now into a side view, Alt Z for X-ray mode, and move it to the starting point of the pipe. Press E to extrude it and drag that out to the first corner, then E once more and bring it all the way to the top. Now let's select all of this, doesn't matter how, either all verts or all edges, and press P to separate, and once more we'll separate the selection. I'm now also realizing I didn't rename the wheels, so we'll do that in a second, but first just hit F2 with this new object selected to rename it to Windshield. Now for the wheels real quick. If you select them all, you can enter a batch rename tool by pressing Ctrl and F2. This will pop up a window, and what we want to do is change the type to set name because we're wanting to change the name completely. Then call them wheels or whatever you want. Now you'll notice they've been renamed to wheels and .001, 002, 003. This is because Blender doesn't allow multiple objects to have the same name, and it will always suffix them with numbers. All we need to do here is try to line our edges up a bit better with the reference, so keep checking different views, come in and out of X-ray mode, and just roughly position them where it makes sense. I'll also select this corner vert here and press Ctrl-Shift-B to bevel it, and once more just scroll the mouse wheel to give us an extra segment. Now that we've got a tiny bit more to play with, I'll go back to trying to shape it a bit better. So long as we still have that bend and the windshield itself goes straight up instead of at a crazy angle like I had it, then it's all good. We can grab this top vert here, press E to extrude it, and I'll lock it to the Y-axis. And remember, because we've got clipping enabled on the mirror modifier, it won't go past the center point. I'll also Ctrl-Shift-B this top corner vert here for a cheeky bit of detail. Now we've got this mesh, which essentially consists of just edges. We can convert it to our own custom curve, which is as easy as right-clicking, choose Convert to Curve. One thing to note here is the icon for this object over here has now changed. This is the data menu and it's context dependent. For example, if I select the main body, you'll see the icon is this triangle with points, which symbolizes a mesh. And for the curve, it's a spliny, curvy thing. This section will have certain parameters that you can control. And for curves, there's a really nice one under the geometry dropdown, which will allow us to give some thickness to this edge simply by increasing the depth value here. There's also an option to fill the gaps, which is often useful, but for some reason I decided not today. Now, this is still a curve object, so we can't do any mesh editing to it. So if you're happy with the thickness, then just right click, choose Convert to again, and select Mesh. Now it's back to being a mesh. And because of these conversions we're doing, we have lost the mirror modifier. It's basically been applied to the object. So let's come into face mode, turn on X-ray, select half of the object, and delete it. Now we can add the mirror modifier back on. Just make sure to select the correct axis, obviously, and I'll also re-enable the clipping option. Let's fill the cap on this, since I didn't bother with the checkbox from when it was a curve. Alt-Shift-Click an edge to select all the loops, and then press F to fill. I'm looking at this bottom loop here now, and for me this is just high enough, so I don't need to add another one in, but if it's lower for you, then go ahead and Control R and bring in another loop to just above the bonnet. The reason for this is I'm going to select the inner faces here, and then X to delete them. And now we can grab the right side borders of these open edges that we just created and extrude them across. Make sure you don't also select the top edges, but even if you do, there's a chance that the clipping option on the mirror modifier might save you and collapse all of it down. So just do whatever. That's my final advice. Let's grab both the front and the back faces now and inset them by pressing I and just dragging the mouse. Checking the reference with X-ray mode, you should be able to tell that we're not exactly matching where the glass would be. And that's fine, we can move things around, but remember, because this is at an angle, we can't just move them all willy-nilly. Otherwise it's not going to be flush to the main shape anymore. So this is where GG comes in handy again, and I'm going to select both the front and back edge here. And if I press G twice, I can slide it up and down. I know I already covered this earlier, but you might not have been paying attention. One thing I forgot to mention about pressing G twice is you can actually hold the Alt key to send the selection outside of the direction. This would have been handy while I was moving this top edge here, but I forgot about it. No worries. We can move these verts where they need to be anyway. Now let's punch a hole in this windshield by selecting both the front and back faces here. Then right click and choose Bridge Faces. This is different from just deleting the faces in that it also fills the geometry on the sides, which means we're done with this bit. Let's tackle the interior next, and we'll start by selecting all these inside faces, which is going to be easier if you select the first one and then Control click the last. This works in all edit modes, and it just selects everything in the shortest path between selections. Then we can press I and drag the mouse to inset. If you find yourself insetting each face individually, then you've accidentally pressed I twice. So just press it again to get back into a grouped inset. Before we extrude and scale this down to create our inside volume, I want to do something about the dash area, like you can see in the reference here, since this won't be a part of the selection that we'll pull down. The easiest solution is to add in an edge loop, but you'll notice that when we try, the loop isn't going all the way through. And this is because it's beating a polygon with more than 4 verts, so it doesn't know how to continue the loop. To fix this and also tidy up the topology here a bit, we'll add a loop cut on the right side and slide it up, then holding the Control key, we'll snap it to this vertex here so it lines up. Remember that for this to work, your snapping doesn't need to be enabled, but you must have already set it to vertices. Now when we use Control and R on the same area, we get the loop cut all the way through. We'll also want to delete the center faces here. So again, select one, Control click the last one, then X and delete faces. Now we can select all the edges and just drag them across. So let's select these faces again, but not the dash area or the little border that we created with the inset. And then we'll press E to extrude, but then just right click to cancel the movement. Pretty confusing, I know. The extra geometry still exists, we just canceled placing it. Now we can press Alt and S, which is similar to scale, but instead of scaling uniformly, it will scale based on the normals of the geometry. Very handy. We did get some geometry poking through here though, so if you have it as well, just grab it and pull it back in. I also want to just grab the faces of the dash area here, give it a little extrude, and then a slight rotation on the y-axis. We'll come back to this area later as well. For now, let's keep working on the base interior shape, and the thing I want to focus on is the wheel arch in the back. You can see it here in the reference that it's pretty flat and low down in the middle, but we need this extra shape here to cover the entire wheels. So if I were to just come here and delete those faces, you should notice that these need to be a bit wider to cover the wheels entirely. And this is confirmed on our schematics when we come to a top view here. So we can just move this across a bit to match. I'll also chuck in an extra loop here, as I've noticed this area isn't entirely flush with the front, as it has a slight lip. And I'll grab this edge, extrude it down the y-axis to the center. Next, I'll grab these edges from the open border we've got here and press E and Z to extrude them down. Then to straighten them all out, I'll press S, Z, and 0. And then using the control click to snap method, just move this up and snap them to the corner of this lip point here. I know I need to weld some verts here, but just to be on the safe side and make sure I didn't miss some anywhere else, I'll press A to select all, M to merge, and choose by distance. When we added in that loop for the lip, we gave ourselves some extra geometry on this doorway curve that we might as well make use of. So I'll tidy it up slightly by using J to connect these two verts. Then just get into a side view, box select the verts, and tweak them a bit. Totally optional, but we may as well make use of what we've got. Back to the interior though, let's grab this row of edges, E to extrude, Y-axis, and then make sure we weld up those verts again. You could just go into X-ray, do some box selections and weld where you need it, but that's too many buttons. So just press A to select all, M again to merge, and by distance. If we take a look at our reference again, there's this slight bump down the center here for the gear sticks. This is one of those things that varies wildly depending on which reference you're looking at, so I'm going to take it as a loose guide. I'm also noticing that the raised sections we have in the back might be a little too far forward, and if I check the schematic, this seems to make sense as well. So I'm just going to select some of these faces and pull them back a bit. We may need to tweak it again when the chairs come in, but for now it will do. So back to the gear area. We could just run a loop through the entire Jeep to give us something to work with, but that's also going to give us a lot of geometry that we'll have no use for. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to select the edges for the area we need. And then if you right click, you'll see an option to subdivide. Now we have the extra loop only where we need it. So let's move these verts around to try and fit the silhouette of what we're going for. And it looks like I'm going to need an extra loop in here too, which is happy days because now we have some extra freebies for this curvy doorway. And although we definitely don't need to do this next loop, I'm feeling sorry for the least curvy part of this doorway. So let's get another loop in here and move it down and across a bit. Nice. We can face select our gear area now and extrude it out. Then I'll just keep tweaking it a bit until I like the look of the shape. This is another contender for something that could change after the seats go in, so I'm not too bothered about it right now. Speaking of seats, we'll move on to those in the next video, where we'll also cover the steering wheel, the dash, gear levers, pedals, front plate, chassis, just so many things. I really should have picked a fruit or something to make. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.